She is a living history volunteer who's been with the museum for a number of years. She also has the honor of presenting programs like this all around our local area and across the country. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Alice Miller for Beauty and Duty.
Okay, yes, I am on. Right. I kind of want to avoid the spotlight a little bit. There, so I can see you. That's great. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming today to Beauty and Duty. And I want to thank the Museum of Light for allowing me to share my passion, my collection with you. This is so much fun for me to talk about these uniforms and to talk about the women that wore them and their histories. I'm an Army brat. My dad served 28 years in the Army, and my sister, which is the driving force behind much of this collection, was 27 years in the Air Force. So I come from a military family, and I love these uniforms. I love collecting them. I love everything about them. I love the styles. I'm World War I today, isn't that something? I love the styles. I love the materials. I love the way they smell. Their colors. It's fabulous. But the best part about the uniforms is the history behind them. The women that wore them. When you read about them, you read their stories, then you start connecting the dots. It's wonderful. You say, oh my gosh, that's why that happened. It's great. Well, I won't go into too much. We have 9 uniforms besides the one I'm wearing to talk about today. And also I want to remind you that the uniforms that we'll be presenting, most of them are from local women that lived here in the Northwest. So we're very lucky to have them. But I want to remind you, women have always been there. Always. Through all of our military history, from the Revolutionary War to today's well-trained and professional military women. They make over 15% of the women in our military today. Wonderful, wonderful 15% of our military today. So just keep that in mind. Women have always been there, and they've changed a lot of our history through what they've done in the military, been able to do. So let's start with my uniform, the one I'm wearing. This is World War I. Yesterday was Veterans Day, wasn't it? How many veterans do we have here with us? Thank you so much for your service. Thank you. And why do we have Veterans Day? It's on the 11th of November. And what was that? Armistice Day, that's right. The 11th month, the 11th day of the 11th hour, and the 11th hour. Armistice of World War I, the Great War. So this is a reproduction uniform of a nurse that I have in my collection, Miss Mary Stewart. And isn't this a pretty blue? Very pretty, isn't it? Now, this is much nicer than the original uniform because the dye that they used in the original uniforms just kept turning purple. Every time they went out into the sun, it went from blue to purple. So the Army nurses called it the blue-purple uniform. And as they marched in a group, you can see the different hues. Now, when the nurses went overseas, they wore, their uniforms had, oops, I got a button undone here. Their uniforms had blue horn ring buttons on them. Well, they wouldn't let them wear Army buttons until they bent over and they could prove to General Pershing how valuable they were. So those lucky gals got to sew Army buttons on their uniforms 6 months after they got overseas. Wasn't that wonderful? Wasn't that nice? Very special for them. Yes. Well, you know, times are changing. In 1912, your skirt was down to the floor. In 1918, my skirt is above my ankles. because women are coming out of the home. They're doing more. They want to become more educated. So we have women becoming doctors and lawyers. It was amazing happening at that time. So we needed clothing and skirts to reflect how busy women are getting, how much they're doing. And joining the military was part of that. So in 1918, we had over 45,000 women in American uniform during World War I. How many of you didn't know that? Yeah. 45,000 women in American uniform. Isn't that amazing? Now the hat is actually a replica of the original hat. It's called a slouch fedora. Isn't this wonderful? And like I said, there's fashion in the uniform. This is very typical of 1918. It's a very typical suit. And the big hats were very fashionable as well. Today we're very relaxed. My niece came home from basic training and my sister said, "Let me show you how to polish your boots." And Katie replied, "Mom, we don't polish boots anymore." And she says, "Well, can I show you how to iron a uniform?" She says, "We don't iron our uniforms either." She said, "Well, what'd you do in basic training?" Not much. March, there you go. But things have changed a lot. So this is 1918 Army nurse. There were 22,000 Army nurses that served in World War I. 22,000. Now, if you look at my collar, you'll see I have U.S. and I have my nurse caduceus on there. But you don't see any, what don't you see in my uniform? Rank, that's right. There's no rank on my uniform. Because the Army nurses went overseas not wearing any rank. I read a diary from one of the nurses I have in my collection. She says, "I am seasick and I didn't really want to go to France and I'm getting paid less than I did when I was a student nurse." But they're going over there. And think about that time in our history. No antibiotics. They had to take care of all those wounded and all those sick. The pandemic was going on with no antibiotics. They changed bandages on wounded men 3 times a day. They had 33 men apiece to take care of. So out of the 22,000 women that served as Army nurses in World War I, 1,200 died of enemy attack, influenza, and just plain exhaustion. And you know, the families of the women that died never even got a telegram or a letter. What they got was the Red Cross would take a picture of their grave with their name on it, put it in postcard form, and send it to their families. Isn't that sad? Today our Army nurses are officers and held with the highest respect. But see what it took to get there. Well, thank you. I'd like to start now with my first model. Isn't this wonderful? We're still in World War I. Now this is Hello Girl. This is our model Tori, and she's wearing a Hello Girl uniform. Now, General Pershing, what he wanted during World War I, he wanted women that could translate French to English and English to French. So she is a telephone operator. And this is the uniform. Now, he put out a call to recruit women, General Pershing did, just for this job. He said they have to be college educated, they have to be able to translate French to English and back and forth, they have to pay for their own uniforms and pay for their own passage overseas. Well, the Army recruited 250 of these women. Isn't that amazing? Even though they had to pay for everything on their own, they really stepped up to this challenge. And they're really lucky. They started out with subdued Army buttons on their uniforms right at the very beginning. Wasn't that wonderful? they bought 3 different uniforms, one for winter, one for spring, and one for summer. And this is the spring uniform. And it looks a lot like mine. She has large forage pockets. They call them forage pockets on the side, so she can put anything she wants in there. It's typical World War I. We've got the sloping shoulders. And if she turns around, the uniform is completely functional. It's amazing. This is one of the World War I uniforms I find absolutely amazing. Want to change it? Because if you look, these women are sitting in a switchboard all day long. This is what they do. They answer phones and translate. So, this uniform, we're going to dress our model. Opens up here. It's very nice. Her collar comes down. Her blouse opens up as well. I think she's pretty relieved. This collar is pretty tight. So she's happy. And that unsnaps. And the collar is open. And, whoops. We put our headset on. Is that okay? You won't know that. She puts her microphone on. She's got her headset on. Isn't that nice? Now this sits, so the buttons have to be pulled away because this is a heavy microphone, isn't it? Yes, this is 1918. So this has to sit on her chest so she can open it up. Now she can sit up on the stool. Do you want to sit facing? There we go. And she can either sit on the coat or the coat will fall away. See how comfortable that is? It's completely split in the back, like a tuxedo. So they made that comfortable for her to sit all day long, just like in our pictures up there. Now, John, could you bring me up the helmet? I have a wonderful volunteer with me today. Now, if you look in the picture, you'll see that those ladies have their gas mask bag ready. And how many seconds do they have to put their...
They had 5 seconds to put their mask on.
5 seconds, so she's got her bag right here.
And most of us, later on, we were given 9 seconds to put our mask on. Which our mask, we had to put it on and seal it to our face. That's why there was no beards, no sideburns. Theirs, they had to pull it out and put the tube in their mouth and start breathing through their mouth, take the nose clip and clip their nose shut so they wouldn't breathe through the nose, and then finish putting the mask on your face.
Yeah. And here's her helmet. Isn't that something? Yeah. So she has her helmet and her gas mask bag with her at all times. Now, you can go ahead and walk around if you like. John, could you help her there? One more little thing about the uniform that's very interesting is, it was very important, the Army stated, that they wear black bloomers under their uniforms, just in case the wind caught their skirt and blew it up. God forbid any of the soldiers see one of their legs. So this is what they wore under their uniforms, even in the summertime. And because she's so layered, we didn't want our model to pass out from heat exhaustion. So, but she is actually, do you want to go ahead? This uniform came about in a very interesting way. Do you see the trunk? It says Women's Telephone Unit, Signal Corps, USA, AEF, France. American Expeditionary Forces. Now, this belonged to Sadie Brown. That is Sadie Brown. So this belonged to her. Now, the trunk actually lived in a sorority apartment for years, 30 or 40 years. This trunk, people ate pizza off of it. They put their feet up on it. It was just a coffee table for a very long time. And the last woman to use it, she thought that was very interesting. Do you want to go to the next room? There she is. That's her name on the side of the trunk. She never researched it. She just thought it was an interesting trunk. And so when she came back out here to Washington, she brought it with her. Well, then she started looking up the women's telephone operators in the Signal Corps in the Army and realized there must be quite a history to this. So she tried to give the trunk to the Washington State History Museum, and they asked her who Sadie Brown was. And she told them that she was a Signal Corps operator during World War I, and asked her where she came from. Well, apparently Sadie came from Philadelphia. So the University of Washington rejected the trunk because she wasn't a local veteran. So she called me. Wasn't that lucky? Yeah. So she called me, and today we have Tori wearing the uniform. Now, Tori, could you come up just for one more second, dear? Thank you. This is the, she has a Signal Corps insignia on her hat. She has Signal Corps insignia on her collar. She has General Pershing's headquarters patch. And this patch right here says she is a chief operator. She's actually a sergeant. And then 2 years overseas. Thank you, dear. Thanks. Unfortunately, because they were women, and I don't know if they just get lost in the system, but none of them never received their World War I victory medal. They didn't receive it. They went to Congress and asked them for the medal, and they said that they were contract women. And the women swore before Congress, the women that were left in 1978 said, no, we were sworn in with the men. We raised our right hands and were sworn in with the men. Eventually, in 1978, they got their medal and their veteran status, but not until almost all of them had died. Isn't that too bad? And what a wonderful service they did, because when they were close to actually bombing where they were, they'd give the women 10 minutes to get their equipment together and get out. And oftentimes, after an operating telephone system or their room or building they were in was bombed, they would go right back in there, clear everything away, set everything back up, and get to work again, even in those bloomers. Isn't that something? Amazing group of women.
Now, honey, they were
Thank you.
a liaison between the French and the English,
Yes.
too.
Very important liaisons between the French and the English as well. Thank you, Tori. Thank you. Come on up. Let you take this with you. Yes. Not all the women's uniforms I have are military. Now, she did work with the French and the English overseas in France. This is Dr. Mabel Seagrave. Very important person here in the Northwest in Seattle. She actually graduated from high school. She was the first in her class here in Seattle High, and then went to study surgery at Johns Hopkins University. And so when she got out of Johns Hopkins University, the Women's Suffragette Society got together, they pooled money together to send her overseas to start a hospital. She started a hospital in France. Dr. Seagraves. Isn't that amazing? She's from here in Seattle. She went over there and she had a group, 30 volunteer women, and they took care of over 70,000 allies, French, English, and American, and civilians, wounded civilians as well in France. Now, if you look at her uniform, she has Canadian-French doctor insignia up here. She has the French, this is a French insignia that says she works with the government and with the public. And then after the war, they gave her a medal. The French gave her a medal for outstanding service to her fellow man, which is very, very nice. I love this uniform. It's very, very functional. Now, she did just about everything she needed to do. The picture is of Dr. Seagraves working on a French soldier right there. She did everything she needed to do, including driving ambulances. So these are her driving gloves. If you get a chance to stick your hand in them, they have velvet corduroy inside. They're very, very nice. But she did everything they asked her to do. Now, again, we don't have boots on our doctor today, but the skirts come up a little bit so she can get busy, climb in and out of an ambulance, and do whatever she needs to do. Of course, she's wearing a tie, and the style of her hat is a French style. This is very typical of the French as well. Now, Dr. Seagraves did everything big. She was a very busy person. She continued to study surgery when she came back from France. She loved everything she did, including she was one of the founding members of Women's Seattle University Club, that big, beautiful club downtown. She was one of their founding members and continued to do that. She was in public service everywhere. By the time she passed away in 1953, she was the chief of Seattle Hospital in 1953. That's really something for a woman back then.
Hey, that's 1935. You're mixing the numbers up.
Oh, but she passed away in
1935.
I'm sorry, she passed away in 35. She was the chief of Seattle Hospital, right?
Yes.
Yes, in 1935 when she passed away. I was told she was a delightful person. She never really said much about her accomplishments in France or what she did, but I was told she did a heck of an imitation of Teddy Roosevelt. So she was not only a skilled surgeon, a wonderful humanitarian, but had a great sense of humor as well. Thank you so much, Tori. Okay, we need our cadet nurse. Nicole? Isn't this a beautiful poster? And we were really lucky to have Nicole wear the uniform for us today. In 1943, when we were in World War II, we needed nurses badly. Franklin Roosevelt wanted to start drafting nurses, just like they were doing in England. And Eleanor put up her hand and said, wait a second, that's really not going to work very well. So what they did, they created the Cadet Nurse Corps. And this is the uniform that they wore when they were cadet nurses. Do you want to go ahead and switch it, honey? Here we go. There we are. It's a group of cadet nurses in Seattle. Isn't that wonderful? And this is a beautiful uniform. They call it a dusty gray uniform. And if you can see, the purse and the hat all match. She has a rounded Peter Pan collar. These are her shoulder straps that go over. You can take them off. And with every year that they accomplished, every year that they studied in their nursing school, you got a Maltese cross. So by the time they were through with 3 years of nursing, they'd have 3 of those little pins across their shoulder. Now, what they did is they went around to all the hospital schools, the government did, and said, if you want to be in the cadet nursing program, we'll pay for your schooling, we'll put you in a uniform, and we'll give you a stipend every month. You have to maintain a B average, but you also have to sign a paper that you're either going to join the Army Nurse Corps, the Navy Nurse Corps, or stay in public service until the duration of the war. So isn't this lovely? She has a cadet nurse on her cadet nurse patch here on her shoulder, and the beret is a little something. I don't know if you can tell, but each one of those nurse cadets has their beret on differently. It's a very hard hat to wear. They called it the General Montgomery beret because it was very hard to put on. So anyway, we have this was under the Public Health Service Act, so all of her insignia is Public Health Service. The big silver pin under her hat, her buttons, and of course the small buttons here. So this is a lovely uniform. They trained 120,000 women during World War II to become registered nurses. Isn't that wonderful? What a good idea they had. Come on up. Now we're going to bring up the woman that wore this uniform. So when she went into the Cadet Nurse Corps, she signed up to be a Navy nurse when she got out of the Nurse Cadet Corps. And these uniforms belong to Faye Midkiff, Ensign Faye Midkiff, and we have her family with us today. It's so nice. Isn't this beautiful as well? What a lovely uniform. Isn't this gorgeous? This is Navy nurse. And I'll tell you, a lot of women join the Navy Nurse Corps because they loved this uniform. They love the double-breasted look. And look at the insignia on the sleeves. This is the Navy Nurse insignia. Isn't that just beautiful? And the buttons are gorgeous. And she has ensign stripes. This is her rank. She's an ensign. Now the hat is just beautiful. It's called a brimless hat because it has no brim. A lot of people say, hey, you're missing that brim, but that's the way it's supposed to be. It's actually a three-piece hat, so you can snap different colors depending on the uniform you're wearing. You can snap different colors on top. And it's got that beautiful Navy eagle on it as well. It's just gorgeous. Now, it's round. What does this remind you of? That round right there. A halo. Yes. It reminds you of a halo, right? So instead of calling it a brimless hat, the Navy nurses started calling it a halo hat because they were angels. Isn't that nice? The Navy nurses were angels. I love that. Now, Faye joined, she was from Montana, and she joined the Cadet Nurse Corps, so she got her training. And then she went to Alameda, California for a while, and then up to Seattle. And she was stationed here in Seattle, and of course, that's where she met her husband. And you know, he was in the Navy too, right? So we can tell you lots and lots of stories of Navy nurses that fell in love with lots and lots of guys in the Navy. I mean, it's just romance there. And so they used to call the hospital ships love boats because of that. So I think that's wonderful. One Navy nurse story I have to tell you real quick. She was from Philadelphia, and she came out here with her husband. Her husband was from Washington State, and actually Eastern Washington. And she came out here to meet her, they'd gotten married in uniform, and came out to meet her new father-in-law and mother-in-law. Well, it was Eastern Washington. She said, I was from Philadelphia. Heck, if I was hungry, I'd go down to the corner restaurant and get a sandwich out of the wall. Remember that? I mean, I don't know how many people remember that. They called them automats. You put in a quarter, you get a sandwich or a donut. She said that's how we ate most of the time. I meet my husband from Eastern Washington. Oh my. We drove for hours until we got to his house, to his parents' house. And I walked in and she said, there were animals everywhere. I said, I'm not used to animals. I'm used to buses. And new mother-in-law grabbed her by the hand and said, let's go kill dinner. I'm hungry. was shocked. Here she was from Philadelphia. She said, what have I gotten myself into? And she said, we went outside and she grabbed this poor defenseless chicken and whacked its head off. And she said, and we ate him for dinner. It was pretty good. But isn't that something? You know, when you're in the military, it kind of throws you into different places, doesn't it? She said, but she learned to love the land of Christmas trees and bumpy roads. That's what she called Washington State. But isn't this a beautiful uniform, both of them? Now I'd like them to stay on stage for just a minute. Oh, I'm so sorry. Here's a picture of Faye in her duty uniform. And apparently that's not her husband. But that's no surprise, is it? That it's beautiful there. Oh, let's go ahead. Can we go to the next? Oh, let's go back. There she is. This is Faye. Isn't that beautiful? This is her new uniform.
Honey, have her family stand up.
Oh, would you guys stand up? This is Faye. Isn't that nice? That's a beautiful uniform. I'm sorry I get to talking so much and telling stories. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. You have to be pretty to be a Navy nurse too. Go ahead, honey. One more. All right. We have our Army nurse.
You can have them. Oh, she wants them all there.
This is our Army nurse. And we don't have a white uniform today with a beautiful cape. What we've got is a working uniform here. This is World War II. You know, I kind of want to dispel the idea that, you know, in the movies you see the white uniform and she's out there in the field with the men in a white uniform with a big red cross on her chest. That's really not how it was. You know, white is really hard to keep clean, especially in a combat situation or when you're out in the field. So even the World War I Army nurses did not wear a white uniform overseas. So this is the Army nurse uniform, and it's very, very practical. This is seersucker. Isn't that something? Seersucker, very popular in World War II, and it's brown and white seersucker, and it just ties around you. Isn't that great? There's no buttons to mess with, very handy. Wash it, hangs on the line, don't have to starch it, don't have to do anything with it. Just put it on. And that's all they needed, actually. But it's World War II, so we had to have a matching hat as well. She doesn't wear a rank on the hat. She wears it up on her collar. And this is the color of the uniforms that the Army nurses were wearing in 1943 and 44 and 45. So the cape matches it as well. She doesn't have seam stockings on right now, but she does have anklets, those wonderful Army anklets. Those are great. So this is basically what she works in all day long. And so we stuck a stethoscope on her. Isn't that nice? So if anybody wants to play with the stethoscope, you're welcome to do that. As long as the nurse says it's okay. Right. So it's a great uniform. You can see it up on the picture there. They liked the uniform so much and it was so practical. By 1945, we were wearing it in the States as well. Would you go ahead and walk around? Now, when I interviewed several Army nurses one day, I was interviewing them and they were sitting around and I said, what did you guys wear overseas? And Jeannie said, we wore the most ugly uniform you ever saw. She said, but it was so practical. It was an ugly brown and white seersucker dress. But we loved it. It was so handy and it was wonderful. She said you could wash it, everything came out of it. It was great. And you could sleep on it and it looked nice and flat in the morning. Wasn't that great? You don't have to worry about that at all. And so I asked Jeannie, I said, well, where were you stationed? She said, well, I was one of the first ladies to graduate from the Nurse Cadet Corps. She said, and they sent me to England to get ready for the D-Day wounded. So I said, well, what was hard about that, Jeannie? And Jeannie said that it was very hard because they went to the docks when they were taking the D-Day wounded off of the ships. And she said they still were covered with sand. So they were ready to cut those bandages off and clean those wounds. She said we had all our equipment as they laid each one of these men out on a dock. And she said as we approached them, they were crying, many of them still shaking badly. She said we didn't even get the chance to cut their bandages off. She said we just put our arms around them and held them. We held them as close as we could. They were still so horrifically frightened of what they had just been through. She said that was the hardest day I have ever been through in my life. Laying down on the dock with each one of them, she said we held them as close as we could and calmed them as much as we could. I said, oh, Jeannie, thank you for your service. I said, was there anything happy? What was it like? Was there anything that made you feel good? She said, well, you know, everything was rationed, even the water. She says everything was rationed. Listen to this, ladies. She could only shower once a week and wash her hair once a week because of all the rationing, because of all the people in England, all the soldiers and nurses that were there. She said, so when I got to go home on a desalinization ship. You know what that meant to her? She could take a shower as long as she wanted. Because it turned seawater into fresh water. She was so excited. She says, oh, I was so looking forward to going home. She says, we got out on the water, and she says, I put my robe on, got out of my uniform, got in the shower, soaked myself all up. She said, I was so happy to be in that shower. And then she heard guns going off on the deck of the ship. Everybody was screaming. She says, oh no, now what's happened? So she said, all covered with soap suds, I put my robe on and ran out on the deck of the ship. She said, one guy grabbed her and kissed her. Another guy grabbed her and kissed her. It was VE Day. Isn't that wonderful? The war was over. She said by the time they got through kissing me, I couldn't find my robe anywhere. I think that is the best story ever. That just tells you how happy they were to have the war over with. They didn't even notice a naked girl on a deck of the ship with all those sailors. I mean, isn't that something? It's amazing what they must have all gone through. But isn't that nice? Let's give our models a hand. Come on up here. Gotta have a little Korean word. Thank you, Alexis. Isn't this beautiful? This belonged to the lady up on the screen. This is Donna McDonald. Now this is 1956. This is just after Korea. And this is an enlisted WAC. Things changed from World War II. This uniform was actually designed by a famous designer named Hattie Carnegie. And if you Google her, you find out she just loved designing clothing for Hollywood starlets and for manufacturers. She was an amazing designer. So they asked her to design this uniform. Not real typical Army, is it? It's not the green. And what color would you call this? Taupe. You're right. They called it rose taupe. And by Korean War, they were using, instead of the flat insignia, they were using the rounded insignia, brass. They called it pregnant brass. So it's rounded. Her Palace Athene is actually rounded, and so is her US. Now, if you notice, they went to antiqued Army buttons. Isn't that nice? And she has an antiqued eagle on that gray hat that's tipped to the side. Very stylish. Remember they called after the war, they called it the new look. Hemlines came down. Everybody was wearing big skirts. Everybody got crazy with furs and everything because no more rationing. So her hemline is just about right there, and the hat and her purse matches her shoes, and she also has antiqued Army embossed eagle snaps on her purse. And everything matched. It was a beautiful uniform. And again, it belonged to Donna McDonald, and she's from Elma. Now, this uniform's a little hard to wear, okay? If you notice, there's no pocket up here. Put your ribbons on. So the women had a heck of a time putting their ribbons up there. Now this looks very pretty on, this is my niece, by the way. This is Alexis Warner. And so this looks nice on her, but if I wore it, I'd look like I was sick. The color was really hard. Even General Eisenhower didn't care for the color that much. And it's nipped in at the waist. It's got pockets down here, but these pockets right here are weird. And so I go to a WAC meeting a couple of times a year, and I have several of these uniforms from women, and a lot of these pockets are sewn down. And I thought, well, maybe they stick out too much or something. So we were at the WAC meeting, and I said, can any of you ladies tell me why they put these pockets here, or what you use them for? You can't even put a piece of Kleenex in there. And one of the ladies said that she used to put a recruiting badge here because there was more material. And the ladies all started laughing. You know, women in the military, they name certain parts of their uniforms certain things. Did you know that? Yeah. They have funny names for certain things, like their hats. You know, the women in Vietnam called their hats pot hats because they were like a pot. Anyway, they were chuckling and they said, well, tell Alice what we called these pockets. If you have young children, can you please put your hands over their ears for me? Isabel said, well, we called those pockets Cop-a-Field pockets. Because the only thing they were good for was the men would come up behind them and stick their hand in them. Okay? You get their idea, right? Yeah. So that's why a lot of the pockets were actually sewn down. And if you give this uniform a couple of years, they're gone completely. Yeah, they got rid of them. In fact, it kind of helped things because then it taught the men to keep their hands in their own pockets. So that was kind of helpful right there. And she's a Spec 5. It's on this uniform. It's kind of an odd rank that they had during a short period of time. She can tell other enlisted people what to do. So if you want to, you can go ahead and walk around now. Donna McDonald was the first WAC in her group to receive the Army Commendation Medal, which is the highest medal you can get in peacetime. There wasn't anything Donna didn't do, anything she didn't excel at. She dreamed of joining the WAC when she was a little girl. She marched around in a WAC uniform during World War II and saluted. So in high school, the minute she turned 18, she was off to the WACs. Do you want to go ahead? One thing that Donna loved to do was skydive. In 1956, she was one of the first women to join a skydiving group on the base she was stationed at. And there she is. And she's about as tall as Alexis. She's about 5 foot nothing. So look how small she is compared to the men. Unfortunately, on November 11th, 1967, Donna was doing a performance jump at the base she was at, 'cause. It was Veterans Day. Both her chutes didn't open, and Donna died. She was 29 years old. She's excelled in the way at everything she did. The Army was typical, took everything she had, put them in boxes, and sent them home to her mother. Her mother was absolutely devastated, just devastated. So she took all the boxes with all the uniforms, all of Donna's pictures, everything, and put them in the attic and left them there for 50 years. When she died, her sister found all the boxes and brought them to me. So we were able to restore all of Donna's uniforms, clean them up, make them look nice, put all her pictures and letters in albums. And it's the favorite thing when I take them to grade schools because it shows Donna out on bivouac in tents. It shows her eating. It shows her cleaning, working in the mess. She took pictures of everything she did. So how nice. Isn't that nice? Donna will still continue to go on. Isn't that wonderful? Let's give our model a hand. All righty, come on up here. Our Vietnam. Isn't that a cute picture of me? You know, when the traveling Vietnam Wall comes here to the Seattle area, they always ask me to put up a tribute to the women that served in Vietnam. So I always like to make sure that I have a uniform from every service. And this uniform, our model, Laura, has it on right now. And they gave it to me in a bag. Somebody gave it to me all wadded up in a grocery bag and said it was a wave uniform. I looked in the bag and I said, that's no wave uniform, but I don't know what it is, so I have to research it. It turns out it's a Vietnam Navy uniform, women's summer service dress Navy uniform. Now she has enlisted insignia on the hat. The hat was with it. We blocked the hat. We cleaned it all up. But she has no enlisted insignia on the shoulders. It's very hard to find because it has to match the material, I found out. She has these wonderful little buttons here that come off, and it would be very comfortable in tropical areas, right? Or during the summer. So I put this up there, right there at the traveling wall. You know, when you do Vietnam uniforms, it's a little different than World War II. We won World War II, right? You can find World War II uniforms. They're in Foot Lockers, they're in attics, because we won it. Not so much Vietnam uniforms, even though it was a long war. Because of the political problems we had, because of the demonstrations, because of everything happening, the protesting, people didn't keep their uniforms. Not at all. And that woman right there, she served in the Navy. She served in Hawaii. She came in to the tent and burst into tears. She said, I haven't seen my uniform for 50 years. She said, when I got out of the Navy, the first thing I did was throw it away. I couldn't wait to throw it away. I wanted to leave that behind me. I didn't want anyone to know I had served. Do you know how many times I've heard that? They dug holes, buried their uniforms. They threw them in garbage cans. They burned them up. Isn't that too bad? Isn't that so sad that that happened? She said that they had to travel 3 women at a time. If you went anywhere in uniform, you had to have 2 other women with you. If you were in your uniform in your car by yourself, you had to wear a coat over your uniform. Take your hat off, put it in the seat next to you, and cover your hat. She said, people were so mean to us in uniform. And women were easier even to pick on than the men. Isn't that something? I heard that out of Fort Lewis, there was a dumpster out there. And when the bus would stop with guys returning from Vietnam, they'd all take their uniforms off, stuff them in the dumpster, and go home. Because they didn't want people to know they had served. Isn't that sad? I hope we never ever treat our veterans like that again. That is the saddest thing I have ever heard of. And you know what makes it amazing? Is those same people that were picked on when they returned home. And many of those men were drafted. They had no choice. Those same men, every day, volunteer here at the Museum of Flight, at the USO, to make sure that our returning men and women today get everything they need and everything that's owed to them. Isn't that nice? Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, come on. Can't have a show without the Marine Corps, right? Beautiful uniform, isn't it? How many joined the Marine Corps? Anybody in here a Marine? Anybody? I'll tell you, I know lots of people join the Marine Corps just because of that uniform. It is absolutely gorgeous, isn't it? And this belonged to Colonel Barrett Jones. And Colonel Jones is from Renton. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't this beautiful? She's got the red and all the bright. Oh my gosh, you know, we need sunglasses to look at her. Look how polished her buttons are. It's just gorgeous. And the hat is beautiful. That's very rare. The hat's dated 1971, so is the uniform. It's rare to see a woman's bell cap with all that wonderful stuff on the hat top. She joined in 1961 and served until 81. So it's pretty hard for a woman, especially in that time period back during Vietnam, to do full bird in only 20 years. Do we have any school teachers in here with us? All righty. Colonel Jones went to college to become a high school teacher. Her sister said that's all she talked about was to become a high school teacher. Well, after she taught for several years, she thought it would be easier to be a Marine instead of a high school teacher. And I agree with her completely. I mean, oh my. So she joined the Marine Corps. And of course, she was amazing. She was first in her class when she graduated from OCS. She was the head of her class in studies. She was an amazing woman. Do you want to go ahead? She was the first woman or individual to receive the Joint Services Commendation Medal. She worked with the Army. She was also, go ahead and...
It says right there.
Yeah, you can go ahead and go to the next one.
I just did.
Yeah, okay. She was also the first woman Marine officer into the jungles of Vietnam in 1965, I think it was, or 67. But she was the first woman into Vietnam. She worked in a combat zone. And do you recognize the gentleman that's next to her? General Westmoreland. That's right. So she was on General Westmoreland's staff. And can we go ahead and walk around if you'd like? Now, isn't that nice? General Westmoreland, he's in his fatigues, isn't he? He's in his combat boots. He looks rather comfortable. But Colonel Jones is in a dress. She's in a had to wear that. The heels on her shoes, she said, came off every day because the roads were so bumpy, they were hard to walk on. She couldn't walk very easily. So she said, I got very good at putting my heels back on and taught the other Marine women how to put their heels on when they came back. That's a cotton dress that they wore during Vietnam. You see she has her purse with her and everything. Now I asked her, I said, what did you love about Vietnam? She says, I love the culture, I love the people. It was wonderful. She talked about how she didn't like having to wear a dress, but she said, I'm a Marine, so I had to maintain a standard. I said, what did you think of General Westmoreland? She said, I'm a Marine, I have no opinion. What a wonderful lady. How kind. Well, she is from Renton, Washington, and it was wonderful. I got to interview her several times before her passing. She's a great lady, an honor to the Marine Corps. Young Marines know who she is, and it's wonderful to be able to have her uniform with us today. She passed away a few years ago, and she was interred at Tahoma Cemetery. Have you ever been to a Marine funeral? I mean, between all the swords and the glitz and the buttons, you have to wear sunglasses, don't you? I mean, it's bright. They are such a traditional service. It is amazing. And there were lots of Navy people there and lots of military, and the tent was overflowing with people. The chaplain that did the service kept calling her him. He kept referring to Colonel Jones as a man. And every time he did that, we said her. Every time he said him, we said her. Well, the fourth time he did it, it was a sultry day in July. A bolt of lightning went over the tent, and a roll of thunder. You wouldn't believe it was loud. And the minister, the chaplain, hung his head and he said, Colonel Jones, I apologize. I will not refer to you as a him again. We all just busted out laughing. It was perfect. She was right there. Isn't that neat? She was right there. And the chaplain said, nothing like being chastised from beyond, is there? No. She's still a colonel. So we're lucky to have her uniform and her history right here with us. Thank you. Go ahead, we'll have our last uniform. Isn't that pretty? Air Force. Can't forget the Air Force. This uniform belonged to Colonel Bonnie Carlson. Now, what style does that look like to you? What does that look like? It's double-breasted, straight skirt. What? This is Air Force, but what style is that?
Navy.
No, actually, they fashioned this uniform after Jackie Kennedy. Yeah, double-breasted, nice lines, really pretty skirt. It came out in the 60s. Isn't that neat? This is what Jackie would have worn if she'd been in uniform. So they called it the Jackie suit. And this is a molded pillbox beret. The berets the military wear now are very soft and floppy. Have you ever seen them? They just put them on. This is very hard. If you stepped on it, it would spring back into shape. It is just like a pillbox hat. Now this is what my sister wore when she first went in the Air Force. I said, Esty, how do you wear that hat? She says, put it on with the eagle facing forward and then don't move. Not very practical, but a beautiful uniform just the same. And it's got the etched silver, very nice, and the etched silver USs. And you know, women were actually, by 1980, women were actually, they had a lot of jobs like men. Women were flying in the Air Force. They were flying fighter planes and cargo planes. We had progressed quite a bit by 1980. You can go ahead and walk around if you like. The woman who wore this, she went to school to become a doctor in World War II. Her father was a doctor, and he did not want his daughter to be a doctor. He said, women have no place in medicine. Isn't that something? Oh my. He wanted her to be a musician, a concert pianist. So every day she went to school, he thought she was going to school to become a concert pianist, when in fact, she was going to school to become a doctor. He never knew. Her and her mother kept it secret from him. So she became a doctor. She was quite a good doctor and very proud of it. She met her husband, who was in the Army Air Corps in World War II. Now, she hasn't joined the service yet. So they came out here to Washington. She was the first female doctor hired by Group Health. So she was the first female doctor hired by Group Health in 1960. Well, she went on to raise 5 children, this very busy doctor did. In 1968, her son was drafted into Vietnam. He came home a year later, and she said, "How's the doctor situation?" And he said, "It's very tough, Mom. There aren't enough doctors to go around." She said, "That's fine. I'll join the Army." Well, she didn't join the Army, but at age 56, she joined the Air Force. And she treated returning Vietnam wounded and their families. Isn't that neat? She left her practice at Group Health. Now, she was a very influential doctor. She was very sophisticated. She did a wonderful job, had a wonderful practice. So she actually signed. She was doctor certificates for Dixie Lee Ray. She was the head of the medical board here in the state of Washington. Isn't that wonderful? But her 5 children remember her as an extremely busy woman. They said that age never ever stopped her from doing anything she wanted to do, which is very evident, isn't it? Here she served in the Air Force for 10 years and then continued helping veterans. I think that's a wonderful story, don't you? Yeah. It just proves you don't have to be really young to accomplish things. Well, before we end our program today, I know there's a World War II woman here, and so I'd like her to stand up. I'd like all of you to meet her. Would you stand up for us? She served in World War II. Very nice. She was a med tech, and she told me that her husband, when she met her husband, she was taking care of him. He was badly wounded. And she said he was the handsomest hunk she'd ever seen. So the first thing she did was she went and looked up his chart and wanted all his statistics. So she could hook him. She did. Took care of a lot of wounded men. Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming. Yes. And thank you. Do you have any questions? Any questions? Anyone? Yes.
So, who would have designed the uniforms? For example, the uniform you're wearing, because there weren't a lot of women in the administration of the military, it could have been something completely hideous.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you hear what she asked to design some of the uniforms? Some of them were completely hideous. Let me tell you, I have a closet that says completely hideous. A lot of the men actually designed some of the uniforms. They weren't happy about it, and they wore them. And you can tell the better looking ones actually were designed by women. And the more practical ones. Actually, I can think during World War II, they designed a white nurse's uniform. The men did, for the nurses. They couldn't wear it. They couldn't bend over in it. They couldn't do anything in it. So they were really happy when they got that seersucker, let me tell you. So sometimes it's men, sometimes it's women. It's just really, it's whatever happens. Yeah, so,
But were they people in the War Department?
yes.
Who did
Yes.
the designing, designers didn't volunteer to design things?
They had a few, Hattie Carnegie volunteered to design the new WAC uniforms. And also, now this sounds kind of funny, during World War II, and she knows this wonderful med tech here, they had off-duty dresses. So they actually had a store designer design those off-duty dresses because you had to be in uniform 24/7. So it just depended. Yes?
How do they keep them clean and retain cleaning? Do they have underthings that they wash instead of the outer garment?
Yeah, it's really, really hard. When you're out in the field and you're trying to stay clean, that helmet is really handy. A lot of the nurses washed their clothes in helmets. You wore as much as you could, as often as you could, as long as you could. Because that sometimes bathing was far and in between, spread apart. A lot of the women used perfume. In fact, in England, it's very cold there, in the winter, England and Belgium. And the women weren't able to heat enough water. The field nurses heat enough water to keep their wounded clean. So they would use a lot of perfume, because after a while, like you're saying. And so the men actually stopped giving the nurses their blankets and bedrolls, because when they get them back, they smell like perfume and just drive the men nuts. So, they stopped doing that because, they couldn't bathe.
Well, when people didn't bathe as much and didn't wash their
That's
clothes
true.
as often.
That's true. Yeah. And we wear things out because we just throw them in the washer and stuff. People did a lot of hand washing back then. So actually clothing lasted longer as well. But World War II underwear, WAC underwear, and Army nurse underwear, it's OD, and it's green, and it pulls up to your chest here. Not real attractive. Yeah.
Did women in the service in World War II paint nylons on like they did at home?
No, actually, that's one reason a lot of women joined the service in World War II, because you were allowed 2 to 3 pairs of stockings every month. A lot of them would actually be really careful with their stockings or sew up the snags in them and then send stockings home to their friends and their sisters. So, Anything else? Well, I just thank you so much for coming. This is always fun. I always enjoy telling everybody about my uniforms. So thank you. Back up here. I'm sorry, I'm going to keep you just a minute longer. If you'd like to take pictures, you're more than welcome. Aren't they beautiful? This is Jody, who's a volunteer at the Museum of Flight. I'm sorry, Tori. And another Tori. This is another niece. Yeah, that's her sister. She's World War I, and she's a history buff, and she's just a really good sport, so she volunteered for me today. And this is Christine, who works here at the Museum of Flight, and Natalie, who works at the Museum of Flight, and then this is Diane, who's a volunteer as well, and then Alexis, who's another good sport and just a really nice niece. And then Laura, who's a volunteer, Gemma, she's a volunteer here as well, and so is Emily. She's a volunteer. Let's give them a hand.